Hey guys, tonight is really a night. The kind of night where the air feels heavy with ancient whispers, and you can almost imagine the distant roll of the Nile, its waters shimmering with moonlight and secrets. The story we're about to slip into belongs to a woman whose name still stirs both awe and controversy. Cleopatra the Queen, who could bend the wills of men, said to command empires. Her presence was described not merely in beauty, but in wit, charm, and a voice that could shift from playful to commanding in a heartbeat. I bet you wouldn't dare look Cleopatra in the eye for more than 3 seconds. Something tells me you'd end up promising her your Netflix password, and maybe your life savings too. Don't forget to subscribe and share this channel with someone who loves soft bedtime stories. Tonight, let your mind drift along with us, and may this soothing story help you find the sweetest dreams. As you listen, I invite you to gently let go of whatever weight you've been carrying today. Think about your feelings, even your worries, and let them settle quietly like sand sinking in water. As you lie there, let your mind grow soft and open, ready to wander through this gentle story until sleep finds you. Cleopatra is born into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek royal house that rules over Egypt from the opulent city of Alexandria. The city itself, founded by Alexander the Great, is the jewel of the Mediterranean, a blend of Egyptian tradition and Greek sophistication. But behind its grand marble facades, the dynasty is crumbling. The throne she's born into is less a gilded seat of power and more like a game of musical chairs, where each sibling is plotting to knock the others down. From the moment of her birth, Cleopatra's world is already marked by tension. Her father, Ptolemy II, Olet, is known as the flute player king, a man more famous for his love of music than for his ability to rule. While he enjoyed a few tunes, Egypt itself was drowning in debt, much of it owed to Rome, the rising superpower of the world. Imagine being born into a family that basically has Rome as its loan shark. Not the most relaxing childhood. Still, Cleopatra grows up surrounded by the extraordinary wealth of Alexandria. The great library towers not far from her palace, holding scrolls from across the known world. Scholars wander its halls, debating philosophy, medicine, and astronomy. It's said Cleopatra herself would later study within those walls, giving her one of the most remarkable educations of any ruler of her age. Historians still argue whether she read these texts in their original languages or through interpreters, but one thing seems clear. Cleopatra was no ordinary royal child. She learns to speak not just Greek, the language of her dynasty, but also Egyptian, the first of her line to truly embrace the tongue of the people she ruled. Later, ancient sources claim she could command as many as 9 languages. That alone gave her an edge over every sibling and rival. In a court full of schemers, she could listen in on almost anyone's plotting without them realizing it. But her early life is far from safe. The Ptolemaic dynasty is notorious for messy family drama. Brothers and sisters compete for the throne, alliances form and break within months, and whispers of poison drift through the palace like incense. Imagine growing up with siblings where dibs on the throne wasn't just a joke, it could get you killed. A quirky tidbit: the Ptolemies had a disturbing family tradition of marrying their siblings to keep the bloodline pure. Cleopatra, of course, would eventually marry 2 of her brothers, not out of love, but because that's how the dynasty rolled. A family dinner in the Ptolemaic household must have felt like both a wedding reception and a murder mystery game. The streets outside her palace, meanwhile, hum with activity. Alexandria is one of the busiest ports in the Mediterranean, with goods flowing in from Africa, Arabia, and Europe. Cleopatra's first memories are not just of the shimmering mosaics in palace halls, but of the smell of fish markets the cries of merchants selling papyrus scrolls, and the ever-present reminder that Egypt is both ancient and modern at once. She belongs to a land where the pyramids are already thousands of years old, yet Greek theatres host brand new plays. As a young girl, she likely watches her father struggle to hold on to his throne bribes sent to Roman senators to keep their legions away from Egyptian soil. She sees firsthand how power is as much about who you can charm as about how many soldiers you command. This lesson planted early will become the core of her survival. For now, Cleopatra is still just a child in a golden cage, learning that her future is as unstable as the Nile's floodwaters. And even though she doesn't know it yet, she's destined to meet men who command the might of Rome itself, and somehow she'll make them bend. Cleopatra's childhood soon bleeds into the ruthless games of succession, and those games are never kind. Inside the sprawling palace with its sun-washed courtyards and cool colonnades, her brothers and sisters watch one another with eyes sharpened like daggers. To outsiders, the Ptolemaic family may look like gods carved into marble, but behind the curtains, it's more like an ancient version of a reality show, where alliances shift faster than a sand dune in a storm. Cleopatra grows up with 4 siblings, 2 sisters Arsinoe and Berenice, and 2 brothers, both confusingly named Ptolemy, Thin, and Ptolemy XIII. It's the sort of family tree that makes you want to keep an index card just to remember who's who. And here's the tricky part in this dynasty: your sibling is as likely to be your co-ruler as your mortal enemy. Historians still argue whether the Ptolemies' obsession with sibling marriage was practical politics or just plain dysfunctional. Either way, Cleopatra's bedtime stories weren't about fairy tale weddings. They were about brothers who might one day push you off the throne. Her father's reign only worsens the instability. King Auletes earns his unflattering nickname the flute player because, well, he spends more time on his music than on actual governing. He loves to throw parties too. Rome is said to have laughed at him for bringing more entertainers than advisors when he visited. And while he plays Egypt burns through money, he piles up debt to Rome, leaving Cleopatra and her siblings with a kingdom perpetually one late payment away from being repossessed like a chariot bought on credit. When Cleopatra is still a teenager, the family feud spills blood. Her sister Berenice seizes the throne during their father's absence and rules for a short while, only to be executed when Auletes returns. Cleopatra watches this unfold with wide eyes, learning that ambition in her family doesn't end with a crown. It often ends with a blade. Imagine sitting at breakfast the morning after your sister has been beheaded. Awkward doesn't even cover it. Still, amid this chaos, Cleopatra grows sharper. She learns the art of listening, of saying just enough, but never too much. Servants whisper that she can walk through a room without being noticed until she wants to be. Then suddenly every head turns as if she had flipped a secret switch of magnetism. Later, Roman writers will gossip endlessly about her beauty, though curiously, her surviving coins show a face with a strong nose, commanding jaw, and thoughtful eyes. Historians still argue whether she was conventionally beautiful at all, or whether her true allure lay in something deeper, the way she moved the tone of her voice, her wit sharpened like a polished dagger, quirky detail. Cleopatra grew up not only with tutors in philosophy and rhetoric, but with exposure to strange remedies and rituals of her time. Ancient Egyptians were big fans of cosmetics and medical oddities. One record suggests women used a mixture of crocodile dung as sunscreen. Yes, that's right, crocodile dung. You thought your SPF 50 smelled weird. Imagine being told, this is how to keep your skin youthful under the blazing Egyptian sun. Cleopatra may or may not have tried it, but you can bet the palace storerooms had a jar or two. Her sisters and brothers, meanwhile, play the constant push and pull of palace alliances. Cleopatra bonds sometimes with Arsinoe, sometimes distrusts her. With her brothers it's even worse, since custom demands she might one day have to marry them in order to solidify rule. A normal sibling squabble over toys suddenly carries the extra spice of, by the way, one day we might rule or kill each other. At court, the great feasts continue. Imagine marble floors slick with wine musicians plucking lyres as servants carry in roasted goose and honey cakes. Children like Cleopatra are expected to sit watch and absorb learning who whispers to whom, who shifts uncomfortably when the priests enter, who drinks too much and talks too loud. Even as a girl, Cleopatra notices everything. And Egypt itself, vast, ancient, eternal, lies beyond the palace gates. Cleopatra rides along the Nile where farmers chant as they sow barley, and the river smells of silt and lotus. She sees temples dedicated to gods older than her dynasty carved deep into stone cliffs. She understands she rules not just a city, but a civilization stretching back millennia. The weight of that history presses down on her small shoulders, but instead of crushing her, it steels her. The palace, though, remains a nest of snakes. At any given moment, Cleopatra must smile across the table at someone she knows could one day betray her. Perhaps that's why she grows into a master of performance. Every glance, every tilt of her head becomes part of an act. To survive here is to always be one step ahead. By her teenage years, Cleopatra already understands the stakes. In her family, you either play the game well, or you vanish from the board entirely. Cleopatra moves through her teenage years with the air of someone who knows the walls have ears. She speaks carefully, but she listens more. It is in these years that her education sharpens into something beyond book learning. She is being sculpted into a weapon of persuasion. Alexandria, with its grand library and scholars from every corner of the Mediterranean, becomes her classroom. Tutors drill her in languages, history, astronomy, and philosophy. By the time she is 17, she can switch tongues like someone changes sandals. Greek, Egyptian, Aramaic, perhaps even a touch of Hebrew and Persian. Later sources claim 9 or more languages danced off her tongue. Historians still argue whether that's exaggerated, but they agree on one thing: Cleopatra could speak directly to ambassadors from nearly anywhere without fumbling for translators. In a world where misunderstanding could mean war, that skill was golden. But her studies aren't just dusty scrolls. She learns rhetoric, the art of bending words until they feel like silk or steel, depending on what she wants. She practices public speaking, standing tall in front of advisors, her voice steady, even as her hands tremble at first. Over time, she learns to lace her words with subtlety, a sly joke here, a sharp edge there. By the end of a speech, she can make her audience laugh, nod, or rethink their entire position. Imagine a teenager who could talk her way out of cleaning her room, not just with her parents, but with half the Roman Senate. Quirky tidbit: Cleopatra isn't just a student of philosophy, she's dabbling in early cosmetics and chemistry too. Ancient records say she experimented with mixtures of herbs, oils, and even ground pearls, dissolved in vinegar supposedly as a beauty potion. Was it actually effective, or just a really expensive glass of sour pearl juice? Historians still argue, but the story itself shows her fascination with experimenting, blending vanity with science. Her tutors also teach her about Egyptian religion. She spends time in temples where incense burns thick and priests chant hymns to Isis. Cleopatra becomes convinced that presenting herself not just as a queen, but as a living goddess is essential. The Ptolemies had always leaned into divine imagery, but Cleopatra studies how to embody it with authenticity. She doesn't just want to look like a goddess, she wants people to believe she is one. Meanwhile, the palace remains a war zone of whispered alliances. Her brothers are growing older and both know the throne isn't big enough for everyone. Cleopatra recognizes that charm and intelligence will only go so far. She needs presence. So she learns how to stage an entrance. Imagine her sweeping into a banquet, the fabric of her gown shimmering with threads of gold, her perfume drifting ahead of her like a herald. She doesn't just walk into a room, she conquers it silently before speaking a word. At the same time, her curiosity about the natural world grows. Ancient anecdotes claim she enjoyed small experiments like dissolving pearls or testing poisons on prisoners grim. Yes, but not unusual for rulers of her time. If true, it paints her as both intellectually daring and dangerously practical. You don't just trust a poison until you've tested it after all. And Cleopatra, with her mind for strategy, always seems to be gathering information, even if it comes from the edge of morality. Her father's debts, however, weigh heavily on her training. Every tutor, every lesson is shadowed by the knowledge that Rome owns a piece of Egypt's future. Cleopatra begins to think in terms of diplomacy, not just rule. She doesn't simply want to wear the crown. She wants to hold it without Rome yanking it away. As a teenager, she likely watches Roman envoys arrive at the palace, men in red cloaks, their Latin words rolling like thunder, their demands sharp. Cleopatra, young as she is, studies their posture, their arrogance, their hunger for wealth. She recognizes a truth her siblings may not fully grasp. The future of Egypt will depend less on family infighting and more on handling Rome. By the time she approaches adulthood, Cleopatra is more than just a girl with clever tutors. She is becoming a strategist with a deep understanding of power, not only how to seize it, but how to make people hand it to her willingly. And so beneath the glittering lamps of Alexandria's palaces, Cleopatra begins shaping herself into the kind of queen who will not just survive the deadly game of thrones, but outplay kings and generals alike. Cleopatra's childhood lessons in survival suddenly become real when she steps into formal power. At just 18, she is declared co-ruler of Egypt alongside her 10-year-old brother Ptolemy, Ithian. Imagine that one moment you're practicing speeches in candlelit halls. The next you're suddenly queen, sharing a throne with a child who can barely keep his sandals tied. On the surface, the arrangement looks stable. Two siblings united to keep the dynasty alive. But anyone who's been keeping track of the Ptolemies knows better. The arrangement is really a powder keg. Behind Ptolemy XIII stands a regent and a cabal of advisors who view Cleopatra with suspicion. Behind Cleopatra, a handful of loyal servants and scholars quietly hope she might steer Egypt back into dignity. From the very beginning, the palace corridors buzz with whispers. Which sibling will move first? Cleopatra throws herself into ruling. Unlike her brother's advisors, she actually leaves the palace to meet people. She goes to temples, visits villages, listens to the farmers who depend on the Nile's flood to survive. She speaks their language, Egyptian, not just Greek, and the crowds adore her. For the first time in generations, a Ptolemaic monarch feels like an Egyptian ruler rather than a foreign conqueror perched in Alexandria. Historians still argue whether this was carefully staged theatre or genuine empathy, but it works. The people cheer Cleopatra, not her brother. Quirky tidbit: Cleopatra may have introduced new coinage during these early years, minting silver drachmas with her image. The coins show her with a hooked nose and a strong chin, not the airbrushed goddess of Hollywood films, but a real commanding presence. Ancient rulers used coinage like Instagram selfies propaganda you could jingle in your pocket. By putting her face on money, Cleopatra reminded Egyptians daily who really mattered. But power attracts enemies, and her brother's faction grows jealous. Soon rumors spread that Cleopatra is plotting to edge young Ptolemy out completely. The regents twist his mind against her, portraying her as arrogant, manipulative, too independent. When tensions boil, Cleopatra is pushed aside. Her brief taste of authority ends with a brutal reality check. One day she's seated on the throne issuing decrees. The next, she finds herself stripped of influence, her supporters hunted down. Before long, she's forced into exile. Picture her fleeing Alexandria under the cover of night, slipping past marble columns and torchlit streets, leaving behind the city she was born to rule. She heads east into the desert where the wind cuts like knives and sand scours her face raw. She has no golden chariot, no silken retinue, just a ragged group of loyalists and a burning determination. Historians still argue how exactly she survived those harsh years. Some suggest she built alliances with desert tribes. Others believe she camped near Syria, plotting her comeback. Whatever the truth, Cleopatra endures. And perhaps in that exile, she learns her most important lesson: power doesn't just come from sitting on a throne. It comes from knowing how to reclaim it when it's taken away. Meanwhile, back in Alexandria, Ptolemy III and his advisors grow overconfident. They believe they've finally rid themselves of their ambitious sister. What they don't know is that Cleopatra's story is only just beginning. And out in the wider world, Rome looms. Julius Caesar, the man who has just marched his legions across Gaul and shaken the foundations of the Republic, is about to step into Cleopatra's orbit. When he does, the Nile and the Tiber will flow together in a storm of politics, passion, and peril. For now, though, Cleopatra remains an exiled queen, staring at the horizon with eyes that burn like torches. She has lost her throne, but not her will. And if history has taught us anything, it's that Cleopatra never stays down for long. The desert becomes Cleopatra's proving ground. Exile is no luxury, no marble columns or perfumed halls, but wind-swept dunes, coarse tents, and the endless rasp of sand underfoot. Yet even here she does not fade into obscurity. Instead, she sharpens herself. With little more than a handful of loyal supporters, she begins to rebuild her strength. If the palace in Alexandria had been a snake pit, the desert is a crucible. She studies survival not from scrolls now, but from the grit of the Bedouin tribes. She learns how to ride hard under the blistering sun, how to keep her lips wet with only a mouthful of water, how to negotiate with strangers who have no reason to trust her. Quirky tidbit. Ancient accounts suggest Cleopatra sometimes traveled disguised, wrapping herself in plain linen and lowering her eyes like a servant girl. Whether this is truth or legend, it paints a vivid picture, a queen learning to vanish into the crowd, hiding her royal aura under dust-stained cloth. Her exile also forces her to turn outward toward the volatile politics of the region. Syria lies not far away, a place where exiled rulers often seek shelter and recruit mercenaries. Cleopatra's emissaries whisper through taverns and markets, offering silver to men willing to fight for her cause. She is barely in her 20s, yet she is already gathering an army from nothing but promises and reputation. Historians still argue whether this was her own initiative or the work of Roman agents who saw her as useful, but what matters is simple: Cleopatra never stops maneuvering. Meanwhile, in Alexandria, Ptolemy XIII is reveling in his victory. His advisors drunk on power parade him as the sole ruler, but he is still a boy easily manipulated. They underestimate Cleopatra's resilience. In their minds, she has finished a discarded piece on the chessboard. What they fail to see is that she's already planning her return, and her next move will bring Rome itself into the Egyptian game. The wider stage shifts. Julius Caesar arrives in pursuit of Pompey the Great, his rival in the Roman Civil War. When Pompey flees to Egypt seeking refuge, the young king's advisors make a spectacular blunder. They murder Pompey thinking Caesar will be pleased. Instead, Caesar is horrified. Here was a Roman consul, one of the most powerful men of his age, hacked down on Egyptian soil. Caesar realizes the Ptolemies are reckless, and suddenly the door creaks open for Cleopatra. She seizes the opportunity. Exile or not, she knows the moment to strike. She cannot simply march back into Alexandria with an army that would end in slaughter. No, she needs drama spectacle, something so unforgettable that Caesar himself cannot ignore her. And so she plans the entrance that will echo through history. Picture her by torchlight whispering to her attendants as they roll out a rug, or perhaps a sack of linen. She climbs inside, folds her body tight, and is smuggled into Caesar's quarters like a contraband treasure. When the fabric unravels and she spills onto the floor at his feet, Caesar finds not just a desperate exile, but a queen who knows how to turn desperation into theatre. One moment she is in the desert, an outcast. The next she is reclining before the most powerful man in Rome, her eyes gleaming with the promise of alliance and perhaps something more. Quirky as it sounds, this carpet scene has become one of Cleopatra's defining legends. Historians still argue whether it really happened exactly that way, or whether it was later embroidered by storytellers. But the essence rings true. Cleopatra knew that presentation mattered as much as politics. She could have walked in like any petitioner. Instead, she staged an arrival that even her enemies would remember. Exile has taught her one truth. Above all, power isn't about clinging to the throne you already have. It's about convincing others you deserve the throne they can help you reclaim. And now, with Caesar's entrance into Egypt, the game board has been reset. Cleopatra is ready to play not as a pawn, but as a queen. The scene is almost theatrical, as though history itself decided to borrow from stagecraft. Cleopatra, the exiled queen, makes her legendary re-entry not with a sword or an army, but with silk wit and a dramatic reveal. Caesar, freshly arrived in Alexandria, expects petitions, perhaps bribes. Instead, his servants unroll a rug or a linen sack, depending on which storyteller you trust, and out she tumbles. Dusty from travel yet radiating composure, Cleopatra straightens her gown, smooths her hair, and greets him with a smile that carries both defiance and charm. It is a moment of audacity that transforms her fate. For Caesar, already in Egypt under tense circumstances, this boldness is irresistible. Here is a woman who not only dares to outwit her enemies, but does so with style. Historians still argue whether this exact carpet trick truly happened, or whether it became legend through Roman gossip. But even the most skeptical scholars agree Cleopatra staged her entrances like a master director. She understood that first impressions linger like perfume. From the start, she frames herself not just as a dethroned sister, but as the rightful ruler of Egypt. She speaks with eloquence, switching seamlessly between languages, her words embroidered with references to both Greek philosophy and Egyptian divinity. Caesar, who prides himself on intellect as much as conquest, listens closely. She reminds him that Egypt is not just another client state, but the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. Control of Egypt means control of grain food for Rome's restless masses. A line with her and Caesar secures more than just a throne for a queen. He secures stability for his empire, and she knows how to layer logic with allure. Contemporary Roman accounts dripping with scandal portray Cleopatra as seductive, though often in tones that sound more like envy than fact. A quirky tidbit from Plutarch insists her true magic lay not in her looks, but in her voice, musical, persuasive, able to adapt to the listener's mood. Imagine a queen who could make a hardened general feel like he was being sung to. Caesar, who has faced down armies, finds himself softened by words. Back in Alexandria, Ptolemy XIII and his regents are furious when they realize Cleopatra has infiltrated Caesar's court. They had gambled that Rome would dismiss her. Instead, Caesar begins to tilt the balance in her favor. Cleopatra doesn't just win his ear, she wins his protection. Soon, Ptolemy is summoned, and the two siblings face one another, not across a palace hall, but across Caesar's judgment. One sister armed with wit, one brother armed with advisors, and Caesar in the middle, weighing which future best benefits Rome. The palace itself becomes a stage of tension. Courtiers whisper in mosaic-lined halls. Servants carry trays past torchlit arguments. Alexandria watches with bated breath. Whichever sibling Caesar supports will hold the throne. Cleopatra, clever as ever, doesn't try to hide her alliance. She lets the city see her walking confidently at Caesar's side, draped in linen dyed with Tyrian purple, her head held high. Every gesture says, "I am queen," and Rome knows it. Quirky detail. Some later writers claimed Cleopatra spread perfume in such abundance that her arrival could be scented before it was seen. Whether true or not, the image endures corridors flooded with frankincense and myrrh. Caesar himself enveloped in the aura of a queen, who turned fragrance into politics. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's initial bond with Caesar was calculated manipulation, genuine attraction, or some mixture of both. What cannot be debated is that it worked. Within weeks, the balance of power shifts. Cleopatra, once an exile trudging through desert sand, now stands restored, shielded by the most formidable general of Rome. But Alexandria's intrigues are not over. The streets churn with unrest, soldiers mutter about foreign influence, and Ptolemy's allies plot revenge. For Cleopatra, winning Caesar's favor is only the first step. To truly reclaim her throne, she will need more than wit and perfume. She will need to survive a civil war. Cleopatra's alliance with Caesar does not remain a quiet palace arrangement for long. It explodes into one of the most scandalous affairs of the ancient world. To the Egyptians, she is their rightful queen restored, moving once again through the gilded halls of Alexandria's palace with her head crowned in gold. To the Romans, she becomes a whispered name in taverns, senate chambers, and soldier camps, the queen, who has ensnared Julius Caesar. It begins with strategy, but quickly turns into intimacy. Cleopatra and Caesar are seen together at banquets, their laughter echoing under painted ceilings as musicians pluck harps. He dines at her table, where honey cakes drip with syrup, and wine flows thicker than the Nile's floods. She, ever the dramatist, stages her hospitality with calculated opulence. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra orchestrated these displays as seduction or simply as Egyptian tradition. Either way, Caesar seems enchanted. A quirky tidbit comes from Roman gossip. Cleopatra allegedly once hosted Caesar on a barge decorated like the floating temple of Aphrodite. Draped in silks, perfumed breezes wafting across the deck, she played the role of the goddess herself. To an outsider, this may sound over the top, but Cleopatra knew her audience. Caesar fancied himself a descendant of Venus. What better way to appeal to his ego than to meet him as the goddess of love? Imagine Tinder dates if they required you to bring an entire boat shaped like a shrine. Of course, not everyone is amused. Ptolemy XIII and his advisors seethe. They see Cleopatra's closeness with Caesar as the final nail in their ambitions. Soon, Alexandria erupts in conflict. Ptolemy's forces clash with Caesar's small Roman garrison in the brutal Alexandrian War. Fire spreads through the city, and part of the great library is said to be lost in the chaos, a tragedy that still echoes in every history classroom. Historians still argue how much of the library was truly destroyed, but the symbolism of knowledge burning while power struggles raged is unforgettable. Amid this turmoil, Cleopatra remains beside Caesar, even as arrows whistle past palace walls. Together, they weather sieges, negotiate with mercenaries, and rally troops. For her, this is no idle romance, it is survival. She knows that if Caesar falls, so does she. And she plays her role with precision, rallying Egyptian loyalists and presenting herself as the true face of Egyptian sovereignty. Caesar, for his part, doesn't just offer military support. He seems genuinely intrigued by Cleopatra's intellect. Ancient writers describe evenings where they debated philosophy and astronomy. It's said Cleopatra could charm him, not only with a glance, but with an argument. Imagine the two of them reclining on couches after a feast talking about the stars, while the city outside trembles with war. A strange pairing, perhaps, but one that binds politics and passion into a single knot. When the dust of battle finally settles, the outcome is decisive. Ptolemy III drowns in the Nile during an attempted escape, and Cleopatra reclaims the throne. Yet she does not rule alone according to custom. She marries her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, still just a boy. It is a marriage of necessity, not affection, and everyone knows where the true partnership lies with Caesar. The Egyptian people, who had once cheered her in the streets, now see her restored in splendor. The queen, who had been driven out, is back walking through temples, pouring offerings to the gods, her image once again carved in stone. Yet beneath the pomp lies a new reality. Egypt is now tied more tightly than ever to Rome. Cleopatra has outplayed her brother, but she has also bound her fate to the greatest republic of the age. Still, for now, she basks in triumph. She has not only survived exile and civil war, but turned the most powerful Roman alive into her ally and lover. And soon, this alliance will bring forth something even more extraordinary, a child, who will bind their destinies forever. Cleopatra's triumph in Alexandria blooms into something even more personal, the birth of her son. In 47 BCE, she gives the world Caesarion, officially named Ptolemy, Quafitin, Philopator, Philometor, Caesar. But you can see why everyone just stuck with Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar. His arrival electrifies Egypt and scandalizes Rome. For Cleopatra, the child is more than a boy. He is her living guarantee of legacy. She knows dynasties don't survive on crowns alone. They survive on heirs. And what better heir than the son of Julius Caesar himself? She presents Caesarion not just as her child, but as a bridge between Egypt and Rome, the bloodline that could fuse two empires. Historians still argue whether Caesar ever officially acknowledged him, but Cleopatra makes sure Egypt believes it. Statues show her cradling the boy, inscriptions announce his divine parentage. To her people, Caesarion is the child of Isis and Osiris reborn, a godling, meant to secure their future. Quirky tidbit ancient gossip claims Cleopatra once staged a procession where she dressed Caesarion in golden robes and presented him as the king of kings even as a toddler. Imagine a baby wobbling around in miniature regalia, while courtiers bow like he's about to issue decrees in baby babble. Whether this story is exaggerated or not, it shows Cleopatra's genius for spectacle. She knew how to imprint an image so dazzling that it became memory whether or not it was fact. Caesar himself lingers in Egypt for months after the child's birth, longer than a conquering general normally should. He and Cleopatra sail the Nile together, drifting past temples and villages, their barge decked with purple sails. Roman writers fumed about this Nile cruise, describing it as a scandalous honeymoon. To Egyptians, however, it was a spectacle of divine rulership. The queen and the Roman generals side by side, surveying the land like gods. Of course, this intimacy raises questions. Back in Rome, whispers spread. Caesar already has a wife, Calpurnia, and Roman custom frowns heavily on kingship, let alone foreign queens. Now rumors swirl that Cleopatra wants to install herself as Caesar's consort in Rome, perhaps even as queen. Senators mutter, citizens gossip, and Caesar's enemies sharpen their knives. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra truly intended to rule Rome through Caesar, or whether her ambitions were exaggerated by those who feared her. For Cleopatra, however, the strategy is clear with Caesarion. She cements her stake in both Egypt and Rome. She invests in monumental works to reinforce her divine image temple reliefs, showing her nursing Caesarion as the goddess Isis, a symbol of both motherhood and eternal power. She walks through Alexandria's streets with the boy in her arms, a living emblem of continuity. But the joy of motherhood doesn't make her naive. Cleopatra knows Rome is fickle, and Caesar's favor is not a lifetime guarantee. She watches his every move, carefully aware that Roman politics churn like storm clouds. Her gamble is that Caesar's affection and the existence of their son will keep her secure. For the moment, the gamble seems to work. Caesar, the man who crossed the Rubicon, who humbled Pompey, now spends his nights under the gilded ceilings of Alexandria's palace, whispering in Cleopatra's ear. The world outside may rage with war, but inside the palace, Cleopatra holds his attention as firmly as she once held her own throne. And in her mind, the future seems radiant. With Caesar beside her and Caesarion in her arms, Cleopatra imagines a dynasty that stretches from the Nile to the Tiber. Perhaps she thinks the world might one day bow not just to Rome, but to a union of Rome and Egypt, bound by her son's blood. The dream, shimmering as gold under torchlight, will carry her across the sea to Rome itself. And there, among marble villas and scandalized senators, Cleopatra will test whether her charm can conquer not just a man, but an empire. When Cleopatra sails into Rome, the city buzzes like a stirred beehive. Imagine narrow cobbled streets echoing with gossip senators, whispering in marble halls, matrons clutching their pearls at the thought of this foreign queen. Cleopatra does not arrive quietly. She settles in Caesar's villa across the Tiber River, an estate so lavish that neighbors peek through the trees to catch glimpses of her. The Nile has come to Rome, and everyone knows it. For Caesar, her presence is a political gamble. Rome prided itself on despising kings, yet here is Julius Caesar parading a queen in his private residence. And not just any queen, but one who brings with her a son, whom many suspect is his. Caesar never officially declares Caesarion as his heir, but Cleopatra doesn't need official paperwork. Her very presence alongside the boy keeps tongues wagging. Historians still argue whether Caesar intended to crown Cleopatra as some kind of queen of Rome, but the Senate's unease shows how real the fear was. Quirky tidbit. Roman satirists claimed Cleopatra's villa was so drenched in incense that neighbors joked they could tell which way the Nile wind blew. Whether true or not, it shows how deeply her exotic image seeped into Roman imagination. To some, she was a marvel. To others, a dangerous enchantress threatening the Republic's core values. Cleopatra, ever strategic, embraces the role. She hosts banquets with Egyptian flair, perhaps draping rooms with lotus garlands, pouring wine spiced with cinnamon, and telling stories of the Nile under lamplight. Roman nobles, curious despite themselves, attend these gatherings and find themselves enthralled. Cleopatra does not simply appear as Caesar's mistress, she appears as a living goddess, Isis, incarnate her son, a divine prince. She understands that Rome thrives on spectacle, and she gives it to them in full measure. Yet the resentment grows. Senators grumble that Caesar is already too powerful dictator for life, adored by soldiers, feared by rivals. Now, with Cleopatra in his orbit, some whisper he dreams of wearing a crown, making himself a king, with her as his queen. Rome, allergic to monarchy since expelling its kings centuries earlier, shudders at the idea. Meanwhile, Cleopatra walks the streets of Rome in her gilded litters, her attendants trailing behind. She knows every gaze that falls upon her is sharp with judgment, but she carries herself as though she belongs. Caesar's wife Calpurnia endures the humiliation in silence. Cleopatra, unbothered, focuses on what matters, keeping Caesar close, and Caesarion recognized, even unofficially, as his blood. Historians still argue about how far her influence truly stretched in Roman politics. Some claim she nudged Caesar toward grander visions, perhaps even reshaping the Republic into an empire. Others say this is exaggeration, that Cleopatra was more a symbol than a schemer in Rome. Yet, even as a symbol, she was potent. She embodied everything conservative Romans feared: monarchy, foreign luxury, female power, wrapped in divine pretensions. And then, like a thunderclap, the dream cracks. On the Ides of March 44th, BCE, Caesar falls beneath the daggers of his assassins in the Senate. Blood stains his toga, and the whispers that had once filled Rome's streets explode into chaos. Cleopatra, ensconced in her villa, suddenly finds herself adrift in a hostile city. Her protector is gone, her presence now dangerous. She does not wait for Rome to decide her fate. With Caesarion in her arms, she departs swiftly for Alexandria, her procession slipping back across the Mediterranean. The Roman adventure ends not in triumph but in shock, and Cleopatra returns home to a throne now balanced on a knife's edge. In Alexandria, the people welcome her back as their queen, but Cleopatra feels the shadow of Caesar's death looming. The boy in her arms is not just her son now, he is the living reminder of Rome's fallen dictator. And while some may see this as a blessing, others will see it as a target. Cleopatra's return to Alexandria after Caesar's assassination is heavy with unease. The city's golden mosaics shimmer as brightly as ever, but her thoughts are clouded by Rome's chaos. Caesarion toddles at her side, a living fragment of Caesar's legacy, and Cleopatra knows this child both secures her position and paints a target on their backs. The news of Caesar's death rattles through Egypt like a drumbeat. Julius Caesar, the man who had toppled Pompey, the man who restored Cleopatra to power, is gone, and in his place Rome fractures. The assassins claim they have saved the Republic, but instead they have unleashed civil war. Antony, Octavian, Lepidus, all names that will soon shape Cleopatra's future, begin jockeying for control. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra felt grief for Caesar as a man, or only for the political lifeline he represented. Perhaps it was both. She had shared banquets, laughter, and intimate conversations with him, and he had risked his reputation to support her reign. Yet Cleopatra, ever pragmatic, wastes no time wallowing. Egypt must be secured, for without Rome's stabilizing hand, enemies inside and out will circle like sharks. She quickly eliminates threats close to home. Her younger brother and nominal husband, Ptolemy XIV, dies suddenly, poisoned most likely. Cleopatra never confesses, of course, but it's hard not to see her fingerprints. With him gone, she places Caesarion as her co-ruler, not just as her son, but as her dynastic partner, the boy king under her watchful gaze. A bold move, one that screams both confidence and defiance. Quirky tidbit in temple carvings. Cleopatra has Caesarean depicted as the child god Horus with herself as Isis, their images towering in divine harmony. Ancient propaganda at its finest Instagram filters were nothing compared to hieroglyphic branding. Meanwhile, she maneuvers carefully with Rome. Envoys arrive bearing tidings of shifting alliances. First, it's Mark Antony and Octavian, uniting against Caesar's assassins, a fragile coalition that may crumble at any moment. Cleopatra chooses her side cautiously. She sends ships to support the triumvirs, but not without ensuring her own throne's safety first. She knows that whichever Roman faction wins, she must be positioned as indispensable. Cleopatra also begins to expand Egypt's power beyond court politics. She stabilizes the economy, commissioning new coinage, reforming trade routes, and ensuring the Nile's harvests flow smoothly into granaries. For the first time in decades, Egypt feels less like a pawn of Rome and more like a strong, independent kingdom. Her presence in Alexandria is magnetic. She walks among temples, attends festivals, and makes offerings at shrines, her image as goddess queen reinforced at every turn. Still, the shadow of Caesar haunts her. Senators in Rome spit venom when they speak of her, calling her a temptress, a threat, a foreign queen, meddling in Roman affairs. Pamphlets circulate dripping with scandal, painting her as the woman who bewitched Caesar into dreaming of monarchy. Historians still argue whether this smear campaign reflected true Roman fears or was simply political theatre, but it stuck. Cleopatra was not just a queen, she was a symbol of foreign decadence and dangerous female power. And yet, she is undeterred. In the quiet of her palace, she begins to think ahead. Caesar is gone, but Rome is not finished. Another Roman will rise, and when he does, Cleopatra intends to be waiting. She knows her charm, her intellect, her sheer theatrical brilliance can draw even the hardest general into her orbit. The horizon soon delivers exactly that opportunity. A man as bold as Caesar, as ambitious as Alexander, enters her story, Mark Antony. Where Caesar was cold calculation wrapped in charm, Antony is raw energy wrapped in swagger. He will sail into Cleopatra's life not as a savior, but as a storm, and Cleopatra, ever the strategist, is ready to meet him with thunder of her own. The Mediterranean sun blazes as Mark Antony sails into Cleopatra's orbit. It is 41 BCE, and Rome is once again divided. Antony rules the east. Octavian holds the west, and each watches the other, like wolves circling a carcass. Antony summons Cleopatra to Tarsus, a port city in Asia Minor, ostensibly, to answer accusations that she failed to support Rome sufficiently after Caesar's death. But Cleopatra knows better. This is not just a summons, it is an audition. If she handles Antony as she once handled Caesar, Egypt's throne will be secure. If she fails, she may not return alive. Cleopatra prepares her entrance with the precision of a general planning battle. She does not sail to Tarsus in a shabby galley. She sails in a floating palace. Ancient writers describe her barge as a spectacle, golden sails, billowing oars, flashing silver in the sun. Purple canopies fluttering over a deck, perfumed with incense. Cleopatra reclines beneath a canopy, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite. Her servants fanning her musicians playing softly as the barge drifts upriver. Citizens crowd the banks, whispering that a goddess has arrived on earth. Historians still argue how much of this description is exaggerated, but even the most skeptical admit Cleopatra understood the art of theatre better than anyone of her age. Antony, famous for his bravado, suddenly finds himself overshadowed. Here is a queen who refuses to come crawling, who instead arrives as if he should be the one kneeling. Cleopatra meets him not with nervous flattery, but with calm confidence, her eyes playful, her words sharp. Quirky tidbit. Plutarch claimed that Antony, upon first dining with her, was so impressed by her wit and charm that he abandoned his own banquet and insisted on attending hers instead. Imagine hosting a dinner so good that your guest throws his own caterer under the bus. The chemistry between them is immediate, though not purely romantic. Antony is a soldier blunt and hot-blooded, prone to excess. Cleopatra is a strategist, disciplined and theatrical. Together they spark like flint and steel. Each sees in the other not just companionship, but opportunity. Antony needs Egypt's wealth to fund his campaigns against Parthia. Cleopatra needs Rome's muscle to secure her throne and protect Caesarion's claim. The banquets they share in Tarsus are legendary. Cleopatra hosts feasts dripping with extravagance, couches cushioned in purple golden goblets, brimming with wine delicacies. From across Egypt dates honey-roasted goose. At one, she reportedly dissolves a priceless pearl in vinegar and drinks it simply to prove she can consume wealth beyond measure. Historians still argue whether the pearl trick was possible, but the story itself endures as an image of audacious showmanship. Cleopatra knew Antony loved spectacle, and she delivered it in ways that etched themselves into memory. What makes their encounter so remarkable is how evenly matched they appear. Cleopatra does not shrink before Antony's bluster. She teases him, outwits him, challenges him. Antony, accustomed to obedience, finds himself laughing at her jests, lingering at her table, even sneaking away from his duties to spend time with her. To onlookers, it seems as though Egypt and Rome are flirting across the same couch, plotting while sipping wine. Still underneath the laughter and feasting lies strategy. Cleopatra has measured Antony's weaknesses, his love of pleasure, his need for flattery, his hunger for power, and she weaves them into her web. Antony, for all his experience in battle, doesn't stand a chance. By the time their stay in Tarsus ends, Cleopatra has transformed an interrogation into an alliance. Antony promises to visit her in Alexandria, and she sails home knowing she has secured a new partner, perhaps even a new protector. The exiled queen, who once climbed into Caesar's chambers, rolled in a carpet, now has Antony's heart in her hand, and soon his legions at her command. And so begins the next chapter of Cleopatra's life, a partnership that will outshine even her affair with Caesar, dazzling the world with both passion and tragedy. When Antony arrives in Alexandria, Cleopatra greets him not as a supplicant, but as a queen welcoming an equal. The city itself becomes their stage. Alexandria, with its broad avenues, marble colonnades, and the gleaming Pharos lighthouse, transforms into the backdrop for a love affair that is equal parts romance and propaganda. Cleopatra knows the power of spectacle, and she and Antony together create some of the most extravagant displays the ancient world had ever seen. Their banquets become legendary, dripping with opulence and rumor. Cleopatra establishes what later writers call the inimitable livers, a society dedicated to dining and pleasure. Imagine nights where guests lounge on couches cushioned with embroidered silk servants, pouring wine that never seems to stop flowing, while music of flutes and lyres fills the air. Antony, ever fond of indulgence, dives into this world with gusto. Some Roman commentators sneered that he had traded the discipline of the camp for the excesses of Egypt. Cleopatra, however, knew exactly what she was doing. By offering him pleasure, she bound him tighter to her side. Quirky tidbit: ancient sources claim that Cleopatra and Antony sometimes disguised themselves as commoners sneaking out at night to wander Alexandria's streets. They would dine in taverns, play pranks, and watch street performers as if they were just another couple enjoying the city. Whether true or exaggerated, the story paints them as a pair who delighted in play as much as in politics. Even rulers of empires, it seems, occasionally liked a midnight snack. But behind the laughter and wine lay serious strategy. Antony needed Egypt's wealth to fund his campaigns against Parthia. Cleopatra, in turn, demanded security for herself and her son. She knew Caesarion's position was precarious, especially with Octavian rising in Rome and whispering that he was Caesar's true heir. By aligning with Antony, Cleopatra hoped to secure both her throne and Caesarion's inheritance. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra truly loved Antony, or whether their relationship was primarily political. The truth may be a blend power and passion, feeding off each other until they were inseparable. Their time together in Alexandria sets tongues wagging across the Mediterranean. Roman envoys report back with alarm, describing Antony bewitched by a foreign queen, distracted from his duties, and parading himself as if he were an Egyptian monarch, rather than a Roman general. To the conservative Roman elite it was scandalous. To Cleopatra's supporters it was brilliant. Egypt was no longer a pawn, but the dazzling centre of Antony's world. Cleopatra, as always, stages herself as divine. She and Antony appear together as Dionysus and Isis gods in human form, their union symbolizing the harmony of East and West. Processions wind through Alexandria's streets, Cleopatra in golden robes, Antony beside her citizens, showering them with flowers as though Olympus itself had descended. The city loves it. Rome recoils in horror. And yet, amid the grandeur, there are moments of intimacy. Ancient anecdotes describe Antony fishing with Cleopatra on the Nile. When he fails to catch anything, he secretly orders servants to dive underwater and hook fish to his line. Cleopatra, quick as ever, notices the trick. The next day, she invites dignitaries to watch Antony's skills, only for him to pull up a salted herring she had planted herself. Even in jest, Cleopatra asserts her wit, showing Antony that no matter how powerful he is, she will always keep him on his toes. But their indulgent life cannot last forever. Rumors drift in from Rome. Octavian Caesar's ambitious heir is consolidating power, painting Antony as a traitor seduced by a foreign queen. The world is beginning to divide into two camps, those loyal to Octavian and those bound to Antony. Cleopatra knows what this means. Their romance may glitter under Alexandrian stars, but it is also the prelude to war. For now, though, she reclines beside Antony at feasts, her hand resting on his, her laughter floating through torch-lit halls. The queen, who once smuggled herself in a carpet, has now enthroned herself at the heart of Rome's most dangerous general. Together, they are dazzling, reckless, and unstoppable, or so they believe. The years that follow turn Alexandria into a city of living theatre. With Cleopatra and Antony as his twin stars, the court radiates extravagance and ambition. The queen is no longer merely the ruler of Egypt. She positions herself as the mother of a dynasty that might one day rival Rome itself. And Antony swept into her orbit feeds the dream. Their children together, Alexander, Helios, Cleopatra, Selene, and little Ptolemy Philadelphus, join Caesarion, the son of Caesar, in the palace nursery. Cleopatra parades them as proof of her vision, a family that blends Greek, Egyptian, and Roman bloodlines destined to command continents. She dresses them in miniature crowns and embroidered tunics, presenting them not just as children, but as heirs of gods. Historians still argue whether Antony shared her grand vision, or whether he simply enjoyed the pageantry. What is certain is that Cleopatra choreographs every moment like a performance. Quirky tidbit at one famous banquet, Antony reportedly offered Cleopatra the provinces of the East as a love gift, while she countered with promises of exotic treasures. Some writers claimed they competed to see who could throw away more wealth in a single night. Whether exaggerated or not, the stories fueled Rome's outrage. Senators fumed that Antony was emptying Rome's coffers into Egyptian feasts. Cleopatra, of course, relished the scandal. It made her seem untouchable, larger than life. The peak of their spectacle arrives in 34 BCE with the donations of Alexandria. In a ceremony staged in the city's great gymnasium, Cleopatra and Antony sit on golden thrones draped in jewel-toned robes, their children arrayed beside them like miniature monarchs. Before a cheering Alexandrian crowd, Antony proclaims Cleopatra, Queen of Kings and Caesarion, as Caesar's rightful heir. He grants their children vast eastern territories, kingdoms that in truth he does not yet control. It is a dazzling vision of empire painted in gold leaf and incense. To Alexandria, the donations are breathtaking, a promise that their queen has elevated Egypt to the center of the world. To Rome, they are treason. Octavian seizes upon the spectacle, spreading propaganda that Antony has lost his Roman soul, enthralled by a dangerous queen who dreams of replacing the Republic with a dynasty of her own making. Cleopatra becomes Rome's villainess, the foreign temptress, the woman whose whisper could unmake generals. And yet, in Alexandria, life goes on in glittering defiance. Cleopatra presides over festivals, where the streets bloom with garlands and dancers twirl under torchlight. Musicians play on the harbour ships, decorated with painted prows glide past, as fireworks of incense and firecrackers crackle over the water. The city pulses with confidence, as though Rome's threats are no more than distant thunder. Cleopatra herself plays her role as Isis incarnate with flawless precision. She walks into temples with Caesarion at her side, priests bowing, crowds chanting. Her gowns shimmer with golden thread, her perfume thick with frankincense. Citizens kneel not just to a queen, but to a goddess made flesh. In private, she sharpens her strategies, reading reports from spies in Rome, listening to merchants gossip about Octavian's moves. She knows the storm is coming, but she also knows that fear must never be shown. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra truly believed her dynasty could rule East and West, or whether it was all theatre meant to secure her family's survival. But what is clear is this: she never thought small. Where others saw Egypt as a pawn, she envisioned it as the jewel on the crown of empire. For Antony, the pageantry is intoxicating. He struts through Alexandria in Greek robes, not Roman armor, enjoying the applause of citizens who hail him as Dionysus reborn. Yet with every garland he wears, with every cheer he basks in, he drifts further from Rome's favor and deeper into Cleopatra's embrace. The golden glow of the donations dazzles Alexandria, but beyond the Nile, Octavian sharpens his knives. For all the feast crowns and divine costumes, Cleopatra knows what looms on the horizon war. While Alexandria sparkles under Cleopatra's rule in Rome, the mood darkens. Octavian Caesar's adopted son and heir wastes no chance to paint Antony and Cleopatra as a threat. In his speeches, he conjures images of a Roman general bewitched by a foreign queen, lounging on silk couches, while Rome's enemies gather strength. The donations of Alexandria, in particular, give him all the ammunition he needs. Look, he suggests to the Senate, Antony is handing away Roman provinces like party favors, crowning his illegitimate children kings, and calling a foreign boy Caesarion the son of Caesar. For Romans already allergic to monarchy, this is scandal layered on scandal. Cleopatra knows all this, of course. Her spies in Rome send word of Octavian's propaganda, the whispers that grow louder each day. But she does not retreat. Instead, she doubles down, appearing even more like a goddess queen radiant in golden robes, presiding over Alexandria with serene confidence. Historians still argue whether this was brilliance projecting strength to reassure her people, or folly because it confirmed Octavian's darkest rumors. Meanwhile, Antony is pulled between two worlds. In Rome, he is still officially married to Octavia, Octavian's sister. In Alexandria, he lives openly with Cleopatra, fathering children and playing the part of Eastern king. His Roman supporters grow restless, muttering that he has abandoned Roman values. Octavian seizes on this discord, presenting himself as the sober, disciplined guardian of tradition, Rome's true savior against decadence. Quirky tidbit Roman satirists mocked Antony by claiming Cleopatra had taught him Egyptian tricks, including fortune-telling and superstitions. Some even accused him of wearing exotic costumes during rituals. Whether true or pure slander, the caricature stuck. Antony, the once proud general, was recast as Cleopatra's lovesick puppet. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra continues to weave her vision. She oversees the education of her children, ensuring they learn languages, diplomacy, and ceremonial performance. Caesarion is raised not as a child, but as a living deity, the rightful heir to Caesar and the embodiment of Horus. Processions parade him through the streets, incense clouding the air, chants rising like waves. Cleopatra understands that appearances shape reality. If enough people see her children as rulers, perhaps they will become rulers. Yet reality presses in. Octavian's power grows. The Senate grows weary of Antony's absences of his Eastern indulgence. And Octavian, cunning as ever, begins preparing not just for political victory, but for war. He secures loyalty from the legions, tightens Rome's grain supply, and whispers into the ears of senators that Antony and Cleopatra mean to drag Rome under foreign rule. Cleopatra sharp-eyed senses the storm. She strengthens Egypt's defenses, stockpiles resources, and secures alliances where she can. Yet even she knows that Egypt, mighty as it is, cannot stand alone against Rome. Her only chance is Antony, and Antony's only chance is to rally the East under his banner. Their union, passionate and dazzling, is about to be tested not by banquets and crowns, but by battle lines and ships. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra pushed Antony toward war with Octavian, or whether Antony himself could not resist the challenge. What is certain is that both their fates were now inseparably entwined. Rome would not allow two suns to shine in the sky. Octavian and Antony were on a collision course, and Cleopatra's throne sat at the heart of it. For now, though, Alexandria continues to shine as if nothing is wrong. Musicians play in torchlit gardens, children laugh in palace courtyards, and Cleopatra walks through her city radiant as Isis. But beyond the Nile's fertile banks, Octavian sharpens Rome's legions into blades. The next act will not be played with pearls and perfume, it will be fought with steel. The clash everyone has whispered about finally takes shape in 31 BCE. Cleopatra and Antony gather their fleets on the western coast of Greece, near Actium. Imagine hundreds of ships lined up across the glittering sea, their sails taut with wind, their prows carved into rams and beasts. On the opposite shore, Octavian's forces stand ready, disciplined, lean, and hungry for victory. It is not just a battle for territory, it is a battle for Rome's soul. Cleopatra brings more than wealth to this campaign. Her fleet is formidable, her ships larger than most Roman galleys, bristling with sailors and archers. She commands with confidence, her flagship flying banners dyed deep crimson. Ancient writers love to say she appeared as Isis herself, golden crown, catching the sun as she moved among her sailors. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra truly directed naval maneuvers, or if that image was later Roman propaganda, but there is no doubt she was there, not hidden away in Alexandria, but risking everything at Antony's side. Yet from the start, the odds are stacked against them. Octavian's Admiral Agrippa is a genius at sea. He harasses their supply lines, cuts off reinforcements, and forces the showdown at Actium. Antony, bold as ever, insists on fighting, though some of his generals plead to retreat and regroup. Cleopatra supports Antony's decision. Whether out of loyalty calculation or sheer defiance, no one can be certain. Quirky tidbit later Roman gossip claimed Cleopatra smuggled her personal treasure aboard her ships at Actium, including chests of pearls and silks prepared to flee if things went wrong. Was this foresight, or just a smear campaign to paint her as selfish? Historians still argue, but it illustrates how tightly her reputation was bound to both extravagance and suspicion. The battle itself becomes chaos. Oars thrash, rams crash against hulls, arrows darken the sky. Smoke curls over the sea as burning ships drift their crews screaming. Antony fights valiantly, directing maneuvers, rallying men. But slowly, inevitably, Octavian's fleet closes in. Then, at the height of confusion, Cleopatra makes her move. Her squadron suddenly breaks from the line and flees southward, sails snapping in the wind. To some, this is strategy, an agreed plan to preserve Egypt's forces. To others, it is betrayal, a queen abandoning the fight. Antony, seeing her departure, cannot bear it. He abandons the battle and follows her, his heart overriding his military judgment. Their combined retreat turns the battle into a rout. Octavian's forces seize the moment, cutting down Antony's stranded fleet. The war, though not yet finished, is effectively lost. Back in Rome, Octavian seizes the narrative with ruthless efficiency. He paints Cleopatra as the villain who lured Antony away from duty, who made him abandon his men in the heat of battle. Antony is portrayed as a helpless puppet, bewitched into ruin. Cleopatra becomes the fatal woman, the foreign queen, who nearly toppled Rome through seduction. Whether true or not, the story sticks like wax on a tablet. Cleopatra and Antony sail south, weary, broken, yet still alive. They return to Alexandria, their city still shimmering, though now haunted by whispers of doom. Cleopatra tries to mask the loss, appearing in public, with regal poise draped in gold, her children at her side. But beneath the incense and crowns, she knows the truth: Octavian will come, and he will not stop until Egypt bows or burns. Historians still argue about that fateful moment at Actium. Was Cleopatra's flight cowardice, cunning, or a desperate attempt to save her fleet? Whatever the reason, it changed everything. The Nile's queen and Rome's general, once radiant in their power, now face their twilight. And so, as torches flicker in Alexandria's halls, Cleopatra steels herself for the final act. The queen, who once rolled out of a carpet, who once dissolved pearls in vinegar, must now find a way to outplay Octavian himself. Alexandria, still shimmering with marble and mosaics, suddenly feels more like a gilded cage than a throne. After the catastrophe at Actium, Cleopatra and Antony return with their fleet shattered and their hopes crumbling. The people line the streets to greet them, incense-burning trumpets sounding, but beneath the cheers lies unease. Everyone knows Octavian is coming. The Roman war machine does not forgive, and its shadow stretches long over the Nile. Cleopatra refuses to let despair show. She stages festivals, appears at temples, and parades with her children as if nothing has changed. She dons her golden crown, strides through the palace in silks that glitter under torchlight, and speaks to her court with the voice of a goddess. Historians still argue whether this was courage or pure performance. But one thing is certain: Cleopatra never let her people see her fear. To her, ruling was theatre, and the stage could not go dark, no matter how dire the script, Antony, however, begins to fray. Once the Lion of Rome, he now paces palace corridors with restless fury. His soldiers remain loyal, but they are weary, hungry, and fewer than Octavian's legions. Antony spends long nights in revelry, drowning his anxiety in wine, while Cleopatra sharpens her strategies. She knows Octavian will use their love story as his weapon, and so she prepares every angle, alliances, bribes, even whispers of negotiation. Quirky tidbit, Plutarch claims. Cleopatra began testing poisons on condemned prisoners during these months, seeking the most painless way to die. It sounds macabre, yet also pragmatic. Cleopatra, always the scientist queen, wanted knowledge. If the end came, she would face it on her own terms, not Rome's. Some say she even experimented with snake venom, watching its effects carefully. Historians still argue whether this detail is true or just Roman gossip, but it fits her relentless determination to control her fate. Outside the palace walls, Alexandria tries to carry on. Merchants still sell figs and papyrus in the bustling markets, philosophers still debate in courtyards, sailors still load cargo at the harbour. But tension hangs in the air like a drumbeat, only growing louder. Everyone knows the city is living on borrowed time. Cleopatra seeks every possible option. Envoys are dispatched to Octavian carrying lavish gifts, gold jewels, promises of Egyptian grain. Octavian listens, but he is cold, calculating, and unmoved. He does not want gifts. He wants submission. Rumors swirl that Cleopatra even considered betraying Antony to save herself and her children. Historians still argue if this was true plotting or propaganda, later invented by Octavian, but it adds another layer to her legend, the queen who would stop at nothing. In the palace, Cleopatra walks the line between love and survival. She comforts Antony, whispering reassurances, yet in private, she drafts contingency plans. Her children are hidden, guarded, taught to stay silent. Caesarion, now a teenager, is paraded as a prince, but Cleopatra surely knows Octavian will never allow Caesar's son to live. Every smile she shows him must carry the hidden weight of that knowledge. Night after night, Cleopatra studies maps, letters, reports. She understands that Octavian is not Caesar. He cannot be charmed, cannot be dazzled by feasts or pearls. He is a different kind of Roman, cold, methodical, with eyes fixed not on pleasure, but on empire. And he is coming for Alexandria. The palace grows quieter as the months drag on, the corridors echoing with fewer footsteps. Yet Cleopatra keeps the lamps burning her throne, polished her crown gleaming. If Rome is to claim her, it will not be a queen trembling in shadows. It will be a goddess standing tall, defiant, even as the storm breaks. The storm finally breaks in 30 BCE. Octavian marches south, his legions tightening around Alexandria like a noose. The once bustling harbour bristles not with merchant ships, but with Roman war galleys, their prows glinting in the Mediterranean sun. Dust clouds rise beyond the desert roads as the army approaches. Within the city, the people tremble, their eyes darting to the palace, waiting to see how their queen will face the end. Antony rallies what remains of his troops. Though weary and outnumbered, they still love him. They march through Alexandria's streets with dented shields, their sandals slapping the stone, trying to summon the old pride of Roman legions. Cleopatra watches from her palace balcony, her children pressed to her side. She knows the odds, but she lets her people see only poise. The final battle is swift. Octavian's forces crush Antony's smaller army outside the city walls, then press inward. Antony, realizing the hopelessness, retreats into the palace complex. Here, history veers into tragedy. Hearing a false report that Cleopatra has taken her own life, Antony is overwhelmed. He cannot live without her. With trembling hands, he turns his sword against himself. The blow is deep, but not instantly fatal. His attendants, horrified, lift him and carry him through the palace halls, blood staining the marble. Cleopatra, very much alive, rushes to meet him. Imagine the scene: torches flickering the air thick with incense and iron, as Antony is brought into her chamber. His skin is pale, his breaths shallow. Cleopatra cradles him in her arms, her robe soaked with his blood. She whispers to him, her voice breaking, yet still calm. Antony gazes at her, the queen who had once dazzled him on a golden barge, and breathes his last words before dying in her embrace. Quirky tidbit: some ancient writers claimed that as Antony died, he begged not to be remembered as Rome's traitor, but as a soldier who loved too fiercely. Historians still argue what his last words truly were, but the image of Cleopatra holding him, as life slipped away, became immortal, etched into legend. The palace falls silent after Antony's death. Outside, Octavian's legions march closer, their banners snapping in the wind. Cleopatra retreats to her private quarters with her women, her mind racing. The man who had once shared her throne is gone, and she knows Octavian will not spare her. He wants her alive, not as a queen, but as a trophy for his Roman triumph paraded in chains through the streets of Rome. For Cleopatra, who has lived as a goddess, such humiliation is unthinkable. She prepares for the end. With her attendants, she gathers treasures, final letters, and perhaps even the asp, the serpent that legend will forever tie to her name. Yet even now she keeps her composure. She receives Octavian's envoys in regal dress, speaking with measured calm, bargaining for her children's safety. She shows no fear, only dignity. Historians still argue whether her negotiations brought her children's survival, or whether Octavian simply wished to appear merciful. Cleopatra's mind is already set. She will not walk as a chained captive through Roman streets. She will meet her end on her own terms, as she always has, decisive, dramatic, unforgettable. And so, with Antony gone and Octavian at the gates, the queen prepares her final act. The woman who outplayed kings and generals, who dazzled Caesar and Antony, will now script her own ending, ensuring that even in death, Cleopatra remains legend. The palace is quiet now, its torch-lit halls echoing with the footsteps of Roman soldiers and the whispers of Cleopatra's last attendants. Antony lies entombed, his death still fresh in the air. Octavian has entered Alexandria, victorious, calm, already thinking of how to frame this triumph for Rome. For him, Cleopatra is no longer a queen. She is a prize. He intends to parade her through Rome in chains, a symbol of his dominance. But Cleopatra knows humiliation when she sees it coming. She receives Octavian's envoys dressed in her finest regalia. Golden crown upon her brow, silken robes trailing behind her. She sits upon her throne with poise unshaken. She negotiates fiercely, demanding that her children be spared. She even attempts to sway Octavian himself, speaking with the same charm that had once bent Caesar and Antony. But Octavian is not like them. He is cold, pragmatic, immune to theatrics. His eyes see not a queen, not a goddess, but a potential prop for his triumphal march. Cleopatra realizes then that there is no outplaying him. Historians still argue how her final hours unfolded. Some say she asked to be buried beside Antony and began preparing her tomb. Others claim she staged one last feast, surrounding herself with treasures, as if to leave the world in a blaze of grandeur. What all agree on is this: Cleopatra resolved to end her life by her own hand, not by Rome's. And so in her private chamber, she arranges the scene. Statues of Isis and Osiris glimmer in the lamplight, jars of perfume and gold sparkle around her. Her attendants, loyal to the end, bring her the small basket said to contain figs, and hidden among them the asp, the the serpent whose venom promises a swift, decisive death. Quirky tidbits some later writers suggested she used poisoned ointments, or even a hollow comb laced with venom. But the image of the snake has endured for centuries, a symbol too dramatic for history to let go. Cleopatra reclines on her couch, her crown still gleaming, her eyes calm. She strokes the serpent, allowing it to strike her flesh. The poison courses through her veins and her breath slows. She dies as she lived on her own terms, wrapped in ritual and myth, a queen who would rather embrace death than bow to chains. Her attendants Iris and Charmian follow her into death soon after. Octavian's soldiers arrive too late. They find her lifeless serene, her body radiant in the lamplight, as though she had merely fallen asleep. Octavian, though furious to lose his prize, cannot help but recognize her defiance. He buries her beside Antony, honoring her final wish. Caesarion, her son with Caesar, is not so lucky. He is captured and executed, though her younger children with Antony are spared to live out quieter lives in Rome. The dynasty she fought so fiercely to preserve ends with her, but her legend only grows. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra was a scheming temptress, a shrewd politician, or a tragic lover caught in forces too great to master. Perhaps she was all of these at once. What remains beyond debate is her mastery of image, her refusal to be forgotten. From the carpet trick to the golden barge from pearls dissolved in vinegar to her death by asp. Cleopatra knew that every gesture could become story, and every story could become immortality. And so, the last queen of Egypt, the seductive sovereign who outplayed kings, exits history, not in chains, but in legend. And now, with Cleopatra's story drifting into silence, let yourself drift too. The drama, the banquets, the burning fleets, and the whispered schemes, all of it fades like incense rising into the night. The marble halls of Alexandria, once echoing with music and laughter, grow still. The torches gutter low, the gold glimmers faintly, and the Nile rolls on eternal and unbothered. Imagine Cleopatra herself no longer weighed by crowns or plots, reclining in calm stillness, her eyes closed, her lips soft. Around her, the air is heavy with the fragrance of lotus blossoms and frankincense, the last breath of a queen who chose her ending. The noise of Rome, the clash of legions, the jealous whispers of rivals, all are far away now, like waves breaking on a distant shore. Breathe slowly, as though you are standing by the river at dusk, the water lapping gently against the stones. The heat of the day has passed, and a cool breeze drifts through the reeds. In the sky above, stars glimmer one by one, as though the gods themselves are lighting lanterns to guide your dreams. Rest in the thought that even the fiercest struggles eventually soften into memory and memory into myth. Cleopatra's story, filled with splendor and tragedy, ends in peace. And just like her, you too can let go of today's battles, setting them down gently beside you, knowing they no longer need to be carried into sleep. Your mind grows lighter now, your body softer, as though the weight of the world has been lifted away. Let yourself sink into stillness, your breath slow, steady, calm. Rest your head, close your eyes, and let sleep come to you like the Nile's steady current, inevitable, soothing, eternal.